Hi, everyone. Thank you all so much for being here today. My name is Tina Stacy, and I'm a Principal Research Associate at the Urban Institute. I'm so excited to have you all gathered here today to debut a short documentary film about Rochester, New York's recovery from COVID, and to have a panel discussion with leaders from Rochester, Boston, and Albany about how they're all using federal funds to increase equity. We also just published a summary document that gives examples of how local governments across the country are using federal dollars to increase equity, the link for which will be posted in the chat. Before we begin, a special thank you to the filmmakers from Gravity and Vampire Post, Jordan Daniels, Mark Williams, Austin Herndon, and Aaron Badgett, whose powerful short film you're about to see. Thank you also to the Kresge Foundation for funding this work through the Shared Prosperity Partnership. And thanks to the Urban Institute research team, past and present, including Emma Fernandez, who is here today, and Ivy Hunter, who coordinated the event, as well as all of today's speakers for joining us for this important conversation. A few housekeeping items. We have enabled closed captioning. You can adjust the caption settings with the hide show caption buttons. This event is being recorded, and the recording will be posted online after the event. Speaker biographies and related materials are available online, and all participants are muted, but you can type your questions and comments into the question and answer box at any time. Please also engage with us online using hashtag #live@urban. And please, if you can, take a 1 to 2 minute survey after the end of the event to tell us what you thought of it. So let's dive in. We know communities throughout the United States are facing decisions about how to use federal resources to advance local development efforts. These choices can either foster greater fairness within their regions or reinforce entrenched disparities embedded within our nation's legal frameworks and programs. Achieving greater equity necessitates that funds are directed towards guaranteeing inclusive participation in and benefits from economic expansion, particularly for historically marginalized groups. Today, we're going to hear about how different cities have attempted to use federal funds to increase equity and about how those investments have affected people on the ground. So without further ado, here is the film about Rochester titled Centering Voices, Rochester's Journey Toward Equitable and Inclusive Recovery.
Meet me at the heart of the city in downtown Rochester, New York, where the future awaits you. A place of growth, prosperity, and community.
On one hand, Rochester has been a city that's been really steeped in institutional power.
We were a city that was Silicon Valley before Silicon Valley. So we're talking about the high-tech companies of their day, companies like Xerox, Bausch & Lomb, and of course, Eastman Kodak Company. In many ways, we were the zenith of the American economy.
It's also been a city that is really steeped in the people rising up to fight for social justice. We had the riots of '64 that happened in our community that really leaned on the poor and people of color and people on the margins, where they really forced them to have to push their way in for their piece of equity to be able to thrive and survive in our city.
History is the greatest teacher. It is important for us to look at everything that we do from the historical context. But unfortunately, we live at a time where people have forgotten this sense of history.
Are you Daniel? Yes, sir. Daniel Prude?
In the middle of winter, Daniel Prude stopped breathing on our streets.
Calm down, okay?
What if that was your brother, your father, your uncle? Tragic.
Say his name! Say his name! We had been looking at the history of Rochester. We could see the through lines, that the same challenges that had shown themselves in economic exclusion were the same challenges that were showing up with this man asphyxiated on a dark night in Rochester.
We were being called, I think, like other cities, to address the structural issues within our institutions and the ways in which power is used and the way in which justice is meted out. How do we lift people out of poverty? How do we center the voices of the right people and make decisions that take us in the direction that we collectively as a community want to go?
In the wake of the economic collapse in 2008, I was doing some research and came across a report from the Urban Institute that really described cities that had gone through real economic challenges but had been able to bounce back. And unfortunately, when we read that report, Rochester, New York was at the bottom of the list. We had become a community that was maybe too homogenous in terms of who was making decisions about the community. And at a critical moment, we paused and said, you know what we got to do, though, if we really want to be successful at this? We got to tell the truth. And so we said, let's start the conversation there. Let's start it with the people that are going to have to make some tough decisions. Amen. It was one of the most nerve-wracking moments preparing myself to go and talk with the city of Rochester about how they could spend their money differently. Instead of taking the money in and backfilling budgets and just trying to strengthen our own balance sheets, let's try to strengthen the people in this community. Far from resistance and unwillingness to engage on equitable and inclusive recovery, it was quite the opposite. That the mayor, the county executive, the budget directors all said, how can we help?
We now have these programs that we know that might work, we can put money towards.
It's absolutely important that equity be the primary lens that we look at. Otherwise, we're just going to make the same mistakes of the past, and that's never going to be acceptable.
There's an opening of the eyes that just changes you.
Mayor Malik Evans unveiled his first city budget as mayor for the 2022-23 fiscal year. In it, economic empowerment.
It was crystal clear that collaboration and partnership must be at the center of what we do. And thanks to the American Rescue Plan, we have a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity in the form of hundreds of millions of dollars to take Rochester to the next level.
With By the Block, we're building single-family homes, giving people an opportunity for home ownership. And there was $13 million allocation.
We have to build in inclusive recovery. We have to put equity at the forefront of the decisions we make. And so we have a lot of different tools to do that now.
I was born in Puerto Rico, and when I turned 2, my mom brought us to Rochester, New York, and since then we were raised here. We did a lot of moving, but majority of the time I was mostly in Rochester. I always wanted a house. My family, my mom always rented. I just never grew up in a family home. And I didn't want the same thing for my daughter. I found out about By the Block in April, and so I decided to go to the open houses that they had on Thomas Street. I thought it was going to be difficult to have a real estate agent, having to have a lawyer, look into the bank process. But they were like, let's get this going. They basically told me that by the summertime, say July, I would be finding out if I got chosen.
How was school today? It was fine. We had a sub in all our classes.
Why?
Miss Merle wasn't here. 4th period, we had he was there.
Soyla?
Yes.
I got chosen, and I actually was chosen for my first choice house. The day I closed, I remember that like as if it were yesterday. My daughter was the one to put the key in the lock and opened the door, and from there on out, you know, I looked at her and basically said this was ours and we're here. I'm actually the first one to purchase a home out of my siblings. I lost my mom in 2014, and I really wish she was here to see this. And my siblings tell me, you know, your mom's proud of you. She sees your accomplishments and everything. You've done so much for yourself. I'm happy for this house and what I've gone through to get it.
We look forward to the data to demonstrate that this is something that can be a long-term investment, hopefully, by multiple partners.
This is a major, major investment into neighborhoods.
Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, now and forever. Amen. The city set aside $2.2 million for the Guaranteed Basic Income pilot as a supplement to partner with people, to come alongside of them and give people a chance.
My boyfriend has a moving company, and we are actually in the middle of doing a move. It's not like a 9-to-5 where you're guaranteed a certain paycheck at the end of the week. If people are moving, then we have business. If not, then we don't. I'm part of a big family. We have generations in our house. We're actually about to be first-time grandparents, which has been exciting and challenging in itself. We get by, we survive. However, money is kind of tight.
The individuals that get into this pilot, data has shown that people use these dollars for upward economic mobility, that they use it to save for a down payment for a house, or to buy a new car to allow them to be able to get for work.
I applied for the program. A couple weeks later, I got an email and a call back.
One of the questions that we asked her, as well as all the participants, are, what are your goals with this extra $500 a month? So she said that her goals would be to buy a car and get into a bigger place. My hope is that everyone gets themselves together financially and gets back on their feet and back on track.
It's definitely been a help, just having that card that I can order Uber on when I know she had an appointment we didn't plan for. It's been a true blessing. And only having a year with the program, it's enough time for you to make a difference for yourself. They give you these funds by way of electronic transfer once a month. A great thing was if you don't have a bank account, they actually help you get a bank account. Just being able to pay a bill and not worry about a meal next week, meal or bill. We have more time to enjoy each other without stressing about financial issues.
What'd you say? At first, they didn't believe it. People wasn't even coming to the interviews because they're like, oh, this is money we have to pay back. And we're like, no, this is your money to do whatever they want.
So they are getting ready to induce Clara. She's having her first baby.
Gonna have that great grandboy. Yeah. In September, I plan to have a ride, be shuttling my grandbaby around the way to the hospital with your niece.
We were looking at really kind of reframing how you engage people of color. And so programs like the Guaranteed Basic Income Pilot Program, we're going to really dismantle those dominant structures and really trust people.
Thank you.
see them for who they are, hold their humanity, and not harm them systemically. Once you reconnect yourself, you can't go back to doing things the way you used to do them.
Such powerful stories, and a powerful film. I'd like to now invite our panelists to join me on camera. I'm delighted to introduce them to you all. Hi, everyone. First up, we have Simeon Bannister, the President CEO of the Rochester Area Community Foundation. Thanks for being here, Simeon.
Great to be with you, Tina, and panelists.
Thanks. Second, we have Carm Basile, the CEO of the Capital District Transportation Authority in Albany. Thanks for being
Tina.
here.
Great to be with everyone today.
Thanks for coming. Third, we have Mayor Malik Evans, the mayor of Rochester, New York. Thank you so much for being here.
Good to be here.
And last but not least, we have Stephanie Silva, Affordable Housing Development Officer from the Boston Mayor's Office of Housing. Thanks for being here, Stephanie.
Thanks so much for having me.
Great. So to begin, like we were saying before this event, the film captures so much. There's leaves little to be discussed, but there's actually much more that is happening in Rochester and other cities that we hope other places can learn from as well. So to begin, Simeon, could you tell us in your words what an inclusive recovery and equitable economy mean to you, and how you think metropolitan regions can achieve this goal?
Absolutely. Well, again, thank you for the invitation to participate. And just as a point of departure, I want to start by just thanking Urban for the work that you guys have done in this area, and particularly for the accessibility of the information that you've shared with us. And was mentioned in the video, the Inclusive Recovery Report. That was a blind call to Tina, and she answered. And we started a conversation that's led to so much that's benefited our community in terms of an inclusive and equitable recovery. What that means for us here, again, referring to the video, is really centering people in our community. So often in our past, institutions and organizations have often taken priority. And as I kind of referenced in the video, often when federal dollars in particular for recovery were dispensed, they were often used to kind of shore up balance sheets, to do things that might even benefit the private sector, sometimes at the expense of people in our communities. So it's really been exciting to refocus, particularly on folks that have been on the margins, folks that have been disinvested for a long time, and that has been transformative so far. And we're excited about what more it will bring.
Great, thank you so much. And we appreciate the partnership with you all as well. I've learned so much through all of this work, and it's really just great to see how it's playing out on the ground and all the work that you all have done. Mayor Evans, we heard a bit about some of the initiatives that Rochester is undertaking with federal funds to promote an inclusive recovery in Rochester. Can you tell us about your larger vision for an inclusive recovery and a longer-term equitable economy in Rochester, and about how community voice has shaped this approach to an inclusive recovery?
Yeah, sure. You got a lot in there in that question, but I'll do the best I can. One of our goals is to create a prosperous and equitable Rochester. In order to do that, you have to have an inclusive recovery. We knew that going in. When I took office in 2022, before I even took office, Simeon was needling me saying, hey, listen, we got to look at this inclusive recovery. How are we going to make sure that we ensure this? And what it looks like to us is to make sure that people have opportunity. And you see that, but also being innovative and creative in our approach, not doing the same thing and thinking that we're going to get different results. So the Buy the Block program that you saw, in which we are building close to 60 houses for people that have lived traditionally in red line neighborhoods, within the city of Rochester was part of that recovery. You know, you saw the guaranteed basic income program that we did as a pilot to try to get money into people's pockets to show that the efficacy and the strength of just getting dollars to people to be able to get them to move up the economic ladder. That's part of an inclusive recovery, but also being innovative in our lead pipe program. We know that many urban areas have lead. So we have a goal to be lead free by 2030, and we are spending dollars to advance and accelerate the replacement of every single lead pipe by 2030. And why that's important, because in addition to that, we've also added a workforce component to say that the individuals working on the projects in these neighborhoods should be from disadvantaged communities. So it has a health benefit in terms of making sure that people have safe pipes inside and outside of their homes. But then there's a whole workforce economic development component where we're saying, get involved in the trades, get involved in the unions, and you can have people in their neighborhoods contributing to the economic vitality of their community while also having help. And then there's a huge workforce component that you didn't get, that wasn't talked about in the video that was shown in the end, where we're making sure that we are having targeted workforce investments, particularly in neighborhoods where people need it most, to make sure that they are getting the skills needed to be able to move up the economic ladder in a bunch of different programs that offer skills and training and things that we know are going to be jobs of the future.
That's great. Thank you so much. Yeah, and that workforce component is so important, so that, you know, as we are trying to reinvest in those communities that have been historically disinvested in, that we ensure that those investments are benefiting those incumbent residents rather than, you know, maybe just bringing in new people with higher incomes without benefiting those residents. So those local hiring and workforce practices are so helpful. And one other thing that you mentioned that I thought was really interesting that we've learned along the way in this work is that you mentioned investing in new and innovative projects. And, you know, as someone coming from the Urban Institute, we believe deeply in, you know, investing in evidence-based policies and initiatives. But one thing we heard along the way was that if you only invest in initiatives that have large evaluations of them, then you're only going to be investing in these bigger groups, these bigger organizations with more funding and just keeping on doing the same thing. So sometimes we have to take chances with new things. Of course, it'd be great to evaluate those as well, but it's a really good point.
And I'll just add, we did that because, as we know, after the pandemic, we had levels of violence that we had seen in Rochester that we haven't seen across the community. And to your point, we invested in something, $5 million that we set aside for something called the Peace Collective. And that was geared towards what I call grassroots organizations that are on the ground, the mom and pop organizations that are getting involved in stopping violence on the ground effort. And we directed funds directly to those organizations because, to your point, you just can't do everything. And now we're evaluating it. We hope that it's going to be successful, but we took a chance on that because we knew that these credible messengers do great work in our community and that they can connect with some of the people who need it most.
That's so great to hear, that investing in, not just investing in grassroots initiatives, but in those preventative, investing in communities, right? Rather than having to be punitive later. So that's really great to hear. Switching over to another part of my favorite state, Carm, in Albany, you flexed federal highway dollars to build bus rapid transit lines, expanding the public transit system. These expansions can be an important way for connecting people with low incomes to people of color to jobs in other important locations. How did you use federal dollars in this project, and why was this a project you all decided to pursue?
Thanks, Tina. Thanks for having us to provide, you know, perspective on mobility and the role of mobility in connecting communities. And that's what we aim to do here in the Capital Region. It's great also to hear about the wonderful things that our neighbors a couple hundred miles to the west are doing in the Rochester area. Somewhat familiar with what they're doing. I've visited there many times. It's a city on the rise for sure. But whether it be bus rapid transit or our other family of services, we believe strongly in investing in our community and in connecting our community. And if we do that thoughtfully, economic opportunity can be had by a wide range of people. So the way our bus rapid transit system and the rest of our network has developed, there are wide spans and high frequencies. And what that means is bus service that is available early in the morning until very late in the evening. It's available 7 days a week. It's available so that people that we saw in that video have an opportunity to use it to get to where they need to go. And sometimes in small or mid-sized urban areas, we sort of downgrade that and downplay it and let people fend for themselves. We look at things differently here, and we've developed a network that has a larger city feel to it because of that sort of thoughtfulness in span and frequency. So our bus rapid transit starts, for example, at 4:30 in the morning, and it operates until 1:30 or 2 o'clock in the morning with service every 10 or 15 minutes. So people can get to where they need to go. I was particularly struck by the lady who's, she probably is a grandmother by now. And she said, you know, she would depend on Uber. In my community, when I hear depend on Uber, it sends up, you know, warning signs. We want them to use our service, but people aren't going to use your service if it's not designed to be helpful to them. So that's sort of been our thoughtful way of doing this. And yeah, we were able to flex federal highway funds, and we flexed a lot of different federal transit funds that may or may not have been applicable to the project, but we convinced our partners in the federal government that it was good for our community. So I think people will listen to the story if you have a story to tell.
Yeah, it's such an interesting example. And we've seen this across the nation, in cities across the nation, that when local regions, MPOs, whoever invest in their transit system, ridership actually goes up. You get more revenue. The whole budget, it tends to like balance itself out better. And so this is a great example of that. And just the being able, you know, the ability to flex these highway dollars for transit is such a huge untapped resource that not many states use. So it's really interesting to see that here.
So it's always in the results, right? So you mentioned you see ridership increase and you see revenue go up. Sometimes we forget about that. That's what we're here to do. Our ridership, we're on the state fiscal year, so our ridership for the fiscal year that just closed on March 31 is the highest it's been in the last 20 years. And we broke our all-time record for customer revenue. So if you build it, they will use it. But you have to build it and with the community first in mind, right? And you have to listen to what people need. We regularly talk to customers and community stakeholders. What are we missing? What do we need to do differently? And then and then find the money to do it. Find the money to do it, and basically put your money where your mouth is and get it done.
Yeah, that frequency, reliability, off-peak hour service is huge for equity for people who, you know, work irregular schedules. And then, you know, just the intricacy of the network for people who have to make multiple stops, like parents dropping kids off at daycare and then going to work. All of these things can really help increase equity, increase ridership, and create this upward cycle. Switching over to another pillar of equitable economies, housing. Stephanie, you know, Boston is using some of its federal recovery dollars to help turn city-owned property into green mixed-income communities. Can you tell us a bit about this initiative and how it got started?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm sure most folks are probably familiar, but Boston is it's really an extremely expensive city for housing right now. And so we're really dealing with that crisis, which a lot of folks are. And so one of the challenges that stems from is just the geographic constraints and the availability of land for building that housing. So with the receipt of the American Rescue Plan Act funds, really coupling that with the availability of city-owned land was a core way of starting to try and address that beyond our typical toolbox, which includes things like preservation programs, other production, increasing homeownership through sort of down payment assistance, all those. So to kind of just set a little bit of context, within Boston, we have three sort of agencies that address housing. One is the Boston Housing Authority, which is our public housing agency, and then the planning and development agency dealing with zoning, planning, commercial market rate, and then who I work for, which is the Office of Housing, which is with this development and preservation arm for affordable housing, in addition to sort of housing stability and supportive housing services. So in June 2022, our Mayor Michelle Wu, commissioned a citywide land audit to look at areas, really identifying vacant and underutilized city-owned land parcels. And that stemmed from really her prioritization of recognizing the potential of existing resources and aligning those and priorities across departments with the goal of addressing this housing crisis. So having that, which there's a really great story map online that I would encourage folks to look for, but that is both internally facing and externally facing. So the public could go and see what are these resources that are out there in terms of the public land. What came out of that in the case of this large mixed income green communities that were building across 3 large sites around the city of Boston was this sort of building on our prior partnerships with the Planning and Development Agency, the BPDA. And so we were aiming to allocate those ARPA dollars, and really there was, I think, a very strong drive with the standpoint of the mayor's focus on housing in particular, that about $234 million of the full $560 million City of Boston ARPA allocation was going towards housing projects for the Housing Authority and the Mayor's Office of Housing. So of that, the $30 million going towards these 3 large sites really allowed us to build on the mayor's vision for a city that's welcoming to all. So that's our seniors, our families, our students that are graduating from local colleges and want to stay in the city, but don't necessarily have the resources and ability to do so given current housing prices. So really the goal was to develop housing that's welcoming to all within these areas. And when complete, this initiative is going to create over 900 new affordable housing units, over 250 market rate housing units. And in addition to that, these will include new commercial storefronts and spaces, ideally low-cost rent for our local businesses, some playgrounds and new open playing field areas to serve both the existing residents and the new residents that would be coming to these areas. So that's sort of the goal and the way that we're able to align across departments to sort of drive that forward. And make that public in a way through both the engagement methods that we did leading up to sort of the request for proposals for these sites, as well as just making it available from the get-go of where the mayor was heading with the goals of developing this affordable housing for all.
This is such a great initiative, and both this and the initiative that Karim was talking about with bus rapid transit, there you can read more details about both of those in the document linked in the chat, titled The Building Blocks of Equitable Local Economies. But Stephanie, this is it. There's so many components of this initiative that at all angles really are touching on all of these building blocks, right? All about, the way that they're being built sustainably. One component that I thought was super interesting was that Boston has a policy whereby if an affordable housing development is built on a site that was originally an urban renewal site, people who were displaced from that land during urban renewal have preference for these new units. This is a great way to start making up for some of these past policies that harmed particularly communities of color and communities with low incomes. Can you talk a bit about this policy and how it fits within the city's racial equity goals?
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, so I think it's such an important part of the work here. These sites that we're looking at specifically did come from urban renewal and through eminent domain. And so one of the core things that we especially were hearing from community early on was, what are you going to do about the folks that were removed from these areas? We don't want this to be land that's just developed for luxury housing. And so a big part of that stemmed from our affirmative furthering fair housing process. And so this is actually built into our zoning. requirements for all new developments, that that new developments not only comply with fair housing requirements of HUD, but actually go a step beyond that. And they both mitigate displacement of current residents and expressly look to reverse the previous discriminatory housing practices and outcomes of those policies. So that sort of sets the stage for how we want any new developer to look to this. And this is both fully affordable and market rate developments. Within that, there's a full marketing plan that these developers have to build out. And when, as you mentioned, they're building on this urban renewal land that we're able to provide to developers at effectively no cost in exchange for affordable housing. They are able to say, we can give certain preferences to folks that have been removed. If you apply for our lottery and you are eligible by income, we want you to live here. We want you to be able to build that generational wealth through home ownership, that we are on top of that providing you down payment assistance, or if maybe you're not yet in that position, provide you deed restricted rental housing that you don't have to worry about the risk of being removed or evicted from down the line. So that really is I think a core part of trying to build the equitable city of Boston that we want to see.
That's amazing. And it's just so beautifully poetic. You know, I get chills thinking about how great of a step in the right direction that is. And, you know, one thing that Simeon and I have talked about all along the way here is, you know, we often think about equity investments as, you know, of course, being important for the people who benefit from them, who have faced these history, like this long history of exclusion and oppression. But equity is also good for economies as a whole, right? We need affordable housing. My kids have a really large classroom in their school because there's not just a national teacher shortage, but teachers can't afford to live close enough to the schools in our area, right? And so these investments are good for everyone. They're good for whole economies. They're good for businesses to have employees. And so wondering if you, or if Simeon or if anyone wants to touch on that topic and some of the benefits you've seen to the overall economy. Of course, CARM with transportation, people being able to get to jobs more reliably. Anyone want to hop in on that?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, there's an old adage that, you know, when everyone in a community catches a cold, the folks that are the most marginalized get the flu. And what we recognize is that many of the antidotes for to beat this metaphor up a little bit more, the antidotes for that flu actually end up being solutions that really do benefit the whole. And there's so many wonderful examples. If you think about any data set, whether we're talking about education data, labor data, you know, et cetera, et cetera. One of the things that we noticed here in Rochester is that we ended up talking about different facets, often of the same people. So whether it was folks that had been disinvested, so therefore there were challenges around jobs and opportunity, also looked like challenges in education, also looked like health disparities, and so on and so forth. And in our case, it was particularly obvious that if you did an overlay of neighborhoods, communities that had traditionally been redlined, that we could see these data over and over and over again. And so it just makes sense that if we're going to make meaningful interventions, that we start with the folks that need the resources the most, and go figure that that translates then into a higher floor that really benefits the entire community. Not to mention the fact that I just tend to come from the school of thought that that's the right thing to do. And it certainly motivated some of the needling that the mayor talked about. Now, you guys got to know that he and I have known each other for a long time. We've went to high school together, and that certainly created some of the opportunities for that kind of engagement. And I'll just end by saying relationships actually do matter in this space, and being able to have, you know, that discourse, but it only matters to the extent that we're able to leverage some of the data and information that helps us to make good choices. And we think that this is certainly an example of where we made those good choices.
So I'm intrigued by Simeon's couple of little tidbits, right? So do the right thing. We sometimes forget that's what we're here to do. Do the right thing. I'll flip it. A rising tide raises all boats. Quick story, largest employer in our region is the Albany Medical Center. We have a wonderful partnership with them. that's designed to help their employees get to work. In fact, every ID card issued to Albany Medical Center, from the chief executive officer down to the person who prepares food services, every ID card is live on our buses, meaning they just tap the fare box. There is no fare. It's subsidized by Albany Medical Center. When we're designing service, one of the areas that they identified was an area in Albany that's lower income. We designed the service to help them, but what we did was provide access to that area and the areas around it for the entire community. So everyone benefits by us partnering with the medical center, partnering with the housing authority, and dozens of other organizations. So you can make an incredible impact if you listen and work with the community. You can make an impact far beyond what the project that you're working on is intended to accomplish. So rising tide rises, affects all boats.
Yeah, Carmen, it's funny you should say that, because I know a couple of years ago, Simeon and I, we created a little document around arguing that equity lifts all boats as well. So it's definitely a good point to think about that from all angles. Great. So we're getting some really good audience questions. Please keep sending them in. So I'm going to kind of close up my questions for you and start moving some to them. But Mayor Evans, what advice would you give other mayors or local leaders for allocating resources in a way that puts equity at the center? We know the federal COVID recovery bills gave a unique influx of funding to local governments, but what lessons can we take away for normal budgeting and spending decisions and other federal funding opportunities like IJA and the IRA?
Well, I would say number one, you want to make sure you engage the community. That is absolutely critical. We had telephone town halls, we had surveys, we made sure that people were able to weigh in on the decisions that we were making, from our senior meals program that we used for this and all of the other innovative home and repair program. We made sure that we weighed in on the community. And I know that some people might say, oh, equity is under attack. Well, you can attack equity all you want, but the numbers don't lie. We know, and Simeon said this, that if you look at some of the areas where we have the highest concentrations of homicides and the highest concentration of poverty, they were in areas that were redlined, literally redlined in our community. So we had a moral obligation to make sure that we use these dollars to fix those wrongs. And by fixing those wrongs, we are actually fixing the entire city. Because when you're able to stabilize a neighborhood by building homes, when you're able to stabilize a neighborhood by getting rid of lead pipes, when you're able to stabilize a neighborhood by giving people jobs that are going to be well-paying and jobs of the future, these are all things that are good for everyone, regardless of where you are. And I think that is the case that you have to make, because you want to make sure that you have good public support for this. The second thing I did was I made sure that I had a good relationship with our county, because they deliver a lot of the social services that the city does not provide. They got a chunk of the American Rescue Plan Act that wasn't as much as ours, but we shared our plan with them. They shared their plan with us, and we made sure that we got a 2-for-1 bang for our buck. Now, cities and counties sometimes don't get along. They sometimes argue and fight among one another, but we made a commitment to make sure that we were going to kind of spend these dollars in tandem to stretch these rescue plan dollars so that way they could impact more people in our broader community. And we got the county to also look at these dollars through an equity lens as well. And as a result of that, we were able to really get some great things that we were able to do. And then the last point I'll make is that I'm a big believer in philanthropy as well as the private sector. This allowed them to look at some programs to say, oh, wow, okay, maybe after American Rescue Plans run out, maybe this is something that we want to support because we see what's happening here. So this really gives you an opportunity to prove what it is that you're doing. And then the last point for government, make sure, it may cost a little bit of money. Anyone that's spending these dollars, I hope that they're having somebody audit them, because you want to make sure, we made sure that every single dollar we spent, that the federal government or someone couldn't come back and say, oh, you didn't do it within the confines of the law. So from a technical standpoint, we make sure that anything you're spending dollars on, that you can justify it, to the federal government, because I believe that also creates confidence for the public, but it also shows confidence for the feds that they know that you are spending the dollars within the context of what they were allocated for.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. And that leads well into the next question for Simeon. You mentioned local philanthropy and how, maybe some of these investments can help. And I mean, we saw this, right? With, 10 years ago, well, I was about 6 or 7 years ago, I started a study where we were testing out cash transfers. And at the time, our partner said, you cannot use the word cash transfer. That is a no word that it's a, it will kill the project immediately. Now we've seen that these federal funds have created these guaranteed income cash transfer pilots throughout the nation that have made it a more acceptable term, right? We're seeing evidence that these initiatives can work. So Simeon, from your perspective, what advice would you give other community organizations and foundations about how to partner with local leaders and residents to promote an inclusive recovery and equitable economy?
Sure. Yeah, there are a number of things, not the least of which is many of us, when we're doing our work, we have a tendency to kind of keep our heads down, focusing on just the work that's right in front of us. In some instances, we're responding even to catastrophic circumstances. Obviously, you saw the Daniel Prude murder in the film. But every now and again, we've got to make sure that we lift our heads up and we look around for what's happening around the country, and that we see the ideas that appear to demonstrate some efficacy that we might translate back into our communities. And again, tip of the cap to Urban for the work that you all have helped us to do on that front. The other thing I would say for other philanthropic partners, for community organizations, there's a funny movie from back in the 80s that was called Twins. And in this movie, the kind of more short and rotund Danny DeVito link up with the chiseled and tall Arnold Schwarzenegger character. And the point here is that these two people seem very different from one another, but they actually have a lot more in common. The twins that we tend to use around here are relationship building and connectivity and data. And they look different from each other. They often are articulated and described as different from one another, but they are actually intimately connected with each other. The other thing that the mayor is doing that I really appreciated is that not only did they do the audit, not only have they gathered data, but then through some of the relationship work, they're sharing that information back out to the community to articulate what's been done with those resources so that we build confidence and we overcome some of the cynicism, which is really endemic for community progress. And so I would encourage folks to do the same. We're certainly trying to model that in our behavior here at the Community Foundation, where on one hand, we think about the kind of smart things that we can do in collaboration and partnership, but then we figure out as we're engaging with community, how we create the requisite feedback loops. How do we do the thing and then communicate back with folks about the thing that was done so that we encourage continued participation and continued collaboration. And our belief is that if we do that effectively, that it actually becomes evergreen, that connectivity becomes evergreen. It continues to restore itself and continues to grow. And that's a really exciting prospect for our community.
That is such a great point. And, we hear, so in fact, I've spoken to local leaders who have said, when I asked about community and no one on this call, community engagements for certain initiatives, they would say, yeah, we went to the neighborhood. We told them why what we were doing was good for them. And then we left and we never went back. And that's not community engagement, right? Community engagement needs to start well before any solutions are even proposed, right? Building long-term trust, listening to needs, and then creating solutions in partnership with those communities to address those needs, and then working with them to implement it and coming back and showing how what you heard was changed the decisions, changed the path for what happened, and hearing about what worked, what didn't. So that it's a continuous long trust building activity, not a one-time stop in. So that's a great point. Carm, did you have something to add?
Well, I was just thinking that's a mindset. And you would think that most of us know that, but I've been doing this for a long time and I find that people don't know that, right? So this is not my company. This is the community's company. We are a resource for the community. And I think until people start to change the mindset and adopt, it's obvious the Rochester mindset needs to be adopted, across the country. We aren't here to make me better or anyone else here better. We're here to make the capital region better. But you can say that, but your actions are what are going to prove that. And partnerships really need to become second nature, partnership building, community awareness and engagement. But oftentimes you find that people say that, but they really don't understand what it means. I mean, your example of going into the community and telling them what you're going to do, lots of luck. That's just a recipe for disaster.
And we say in Rochester, it's not me, but we, and we have to demonstrate that. It just can't be words. You have to demonstrate. What do you mean by we?
Was the title of the mayor's first state of the city address, and that message certainly echoed out. I just want to point to in the film, Ms. Rodriguez, in describing her home. I was really struck when she said, "This is ours," right? That she could lay claim to something that belonged to her. And we have a tendency to value the things upon which we can lay claim. And when we're talking about this space, to Carm's point, we're talking about the public good, which means everybody gets to lay claim. And if we're driven by that motivation, that how are we creating the right vehicles? Because sometimes laying claim can be messy. Sometimes laying claim can be cumbersome. But if we're committed to the value proposition there, that if we get more people involved in our discussions, in our discourse, and ultimately in our decision-making, that we ultimately get better outcomes, then we're incented then to do the work to make that happen.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to turn to some audience questions. There's a really great couple of questions that I think are very relevant and are often one of the barriers to implementing such initiatives as the ones we've been discussing today, which is kind of resident political pushback for equity programs, particularly around guaranteed income initiatives and the others. So I guess for everyone, did you receive any pushback from other areas of the community regarding the guaranteed basic income program in Rochester and specifically? And if yes, how did you deal with that? How did you support your staff who are often on the front lines of this work, receiving that pushback?
Well, my title is mayor, so you get pushback for anything you do sometimes in different things. But for guaranteed basic income, we got some pushback, but we did it in a way that was very equitable. We targeted certain zip codes, and you had to be in certain zip codes based upon the poverty line to apply. And we also constantly kept telling the story. I relied a lot on Mayors for Guaranteed Income, the Financial Innovation Lab over at Notre Dame, who's doing our evaluation, to show folks what it was, what the benefit was, and really got people to understand that it wasn't a handout. So anytime we got the opportunity to have a conversation about what guaranteed basic income was and what it was not, we tried to do that. And how I was really able to neutralize the conversation is I said, are you familiar with the Earned Income Tax Credit? And across the board, people would say, yeah. I would say, do you support that? And they would say, yes, we did. Well, I said, did you know in 2021 going to 22, we cut childhood poverty in half by doing the Earned Income Tax Credit at the federal level? Oh, yeah. And you think that's a good thing? Yeah. Well, I said, imagine if we did that regularly, more widespread. I said, I'm just doing that on a smaller scale here in Rochester with the guaranteed income. But of course, you're always going to have people who will have questions about it. But once you get participants that are really willing to tell their story, like you saw in that video, those people work. They work. These were working people. These were people who were looking to take their lives to the next level. It kind of takes the wind out of this sail of this notion that people are doing this because they're lazy and they want to go spend it on just having a good time. But if they want to do that, that's their business. But that's, in so many instances, that's not the case. And the data and the stories kind of undercut a lot of that, and we did it in a fair and equitable way. It was geared towards certain zip codes. It was a random selection, so people were able to see that, but we made sure that we were transparent and over-communicated literally every single step of the way.
That's great. Yeah, and I think guaranteed income is one area really where the research and evidence have just really refuted some of the common misconceptions about guaranteed income. So it's really great to be seeing more studies. Excited to hear that you're also evaluating yours rigorously. And I'd point people who are listening today to the Stockton Economic Empowerment Demonstration studies. Those were some of the very first evidence that was coming out around guaranteed income in the U.S. And, like you said, those results showed that people were investing in their education, investing in upward mobility when they received the guaranteed income. Great. So let's see. Did anyone else have anything to add on that topic of political pushback or community pushback maybe from people who aren't the direct intended recipients of any of the initiatives?
The only thing I would just add is, if we think about this in historical context, I don't recall reading about a national referendum that occurred to promote redlining, as an example. In fact, it was a relatively small group of people that held outsized power that drove and pushed through a policy that has had an echo effect for generations, that has disprivileged whole generations of people, particularly people of color. And so let's be clear that even as we think about this question of polarization of political will, that it does not require 100% unanimous agreement in order for us to make some key decisions that are in service of making sure that people that have been on the margins are recentered. And so it just strikes me that representation actually does matter. It's not lost on me. I don't think it would be lost on anybody that paid attention to the film, that some of the faces that are making the decisions look different than they have in the past. And the experience, knowledge, wisdom that's being brought into rooms actually does matter in terms of the outcomes that we ultimately get to enjoy, and go figure that actually is beneficial, as we established earlier, for everybody in our community. And so it seems to me that, again, we don't need to look for, everybody to be on the same page. We do have an obligation to engage everybody and to create the discursive space to do so. But ultimately, we do have to reach decisions that are in the benefit of people that have been on the margins.
Yeah, very well put. So we're running out of time, so I'm just going to ask one kind of quick question that hopefully everyone can respond to if you would like to. So we know that, ARPA and these federal recovery dollars were kind of a one-time big experiment, right? And flexible dollars that went to local governments. We hadn't seen that before. And we saw all of this innovation come out of it, right? So how are you all thinking about continuing that now that most of those dollars have been allocated, they're starting to be spent up? How are you thinking about continuing these things that you've learned and things that you've seen to be successful using other federal funds like the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, IJA, or the Inflation Reduction Act, or there are many other funding programs as well? How are you taking lessons that you've learned here and ensuring that they continue to move forward and this wasn't just a one-time thing?
Well, we're looking to right now look to see how we can obviously do use some of the other federal programs that can help. And I'll give you one example. We have I have a tree planting initiative in Rochester in which we wanted to plant 6,000 trees within 4 years. We use some from ARPA, but then we also use dollars from the Infrastructure Reduction IRA that was passed as well. So we did that. And then the other thing I'm doing now is now that ARPA, the money has to be committed and spent by, within the next 2 years, we're already starting to embed some of the stuff that worked and starting to use some of our local funds to be able to do that. But for us, it's going to be an all of the above approach. Going to my good friends in philanthropy like Mr. Bannister there, saying, "Hey, this worked. Can you help us leverage this?" And we're doing that. We're going to do that, particularly with housing. We've already talked to our local housing authority, several financial institutions, to make sure that we move the needle, particularly around home ownership. In Rochester, the numbers in this country are absolutely horrible when you look at the home ownership gap between Black and white. And in Rochester, it is not something that we are proud of. We're talking about a 40% gap in the city of Rochester as it relates to home ownership, Black-white home ownership gap in Rochester. But you cannot have a equitable, strong city if you have that kind of gap in home ownership.
So real quick, Tina, if we have proved to the federal government that we were worthy recipients, right, and that we invested smartly, we invested in an equitable manner, and we made a difference in our communities, I would hope moving forward that we've proven that give us more flexibility and we can produce more results. Oftentimes federal programs are very narrow. You can only use funds for a stated purpose, but along the way you find that if you could expand that stated purpose, you can benefit more people and more organizations. So hopefully, and Mayor said something earlier that is very important, make sure you're doing what you say you're going to do and that you spend the money in a way that any auditor could come in and justify what you've done. At the end of the day, though, it's results. And I hope that our results are enough to prove to our federal partners that we're worthy of some flexibility moving forward.
I'd say for philanthropy, we recognize that the nature of philanthropy is evolving. Far from the province of the wealthy and the wealth connected, public philanthropy, particularly community foundations, are really at their best when we're leveraging the positioning that we have to gain insights, to gain clarity, and to then share that information in authentic ways back in our communities. My friend John Eberly in the Capital Region, I'm sure, is doing the same. Lee Pelton and Paul Grogan before him over in Boston have been folks that we've learned from. And so I would encourage for any of you that are in communities that are listening that are not represented on this call to engage your local community foundation, because I am absolutely confident that they are part of this network of folks that are thinking together about how we improve all of our communities together.
And I'll add just on the end, I think that these are all amazing points, and just the sort of ability to demonstrate what's possible when these federal funds are provided to local governments is so important. And I think Mayor Evans makes a great point that you need to show that you can take that and run with it and produce from there. But I think also, just like when we dream, here's some of the things that really come out, and all community members have been asking for decades and longer. So I think coupling all of that together is something that, yeah, now we're looking to the IRA as future other ways that we can maybe enhance our retrofit programs and our housing authority, and all these other ways that we can kind of continue that momentum as we go forward. So sort of try to end it on an optimistic note of bring that potential and kind of keep running full steam ahead with it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that is a great point, and kind of what we've learned from you all, right? That this was such a great opportunity and you took hold of it and you moved forward with it. So we really appreciate you all for being here, but more so for all of the great work that you're doing on the ground to work towards more equitable communities and economies. So thank you all for coming, and I hope you all have a great rest of your day.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks so much.
Thank you all.